start the recording. So actually I learned something new. I'm going to change it to speaker mode. Good afternoon, everyone, for joining. This is our third ARPA Lunch and Learn through Grow North. So all of the communities are trying to figure out what to do with ARPA dollars. The guidance is not out. This is just us in learning mode and trying to give you some ideas of what to do on the local level. And I invited Brian in from Lac du Flambeau to talk about what they did to be more efficient with their CARES Act funds. And from what I understand, they're probably going to do something very similar to ARPA. There are things that are different between the CARES Act dollars and the ARPA dollars that are flowing, and we can have a little bit of a conversation about that. But even though this is a tribal nation taking on this, I think putting it into a grant application mode is really efficient for smaller communities so that you are getting the metrics that you need for reporting at the federal level as a consequence of how you design it. So I'm just going to hand this over to Brian, and you can introduce yourself and talk about how things worked. And I'm sure we'll have enough time for questions, but please take it away.
Okay, so bonjour, my name is Brian Gauthier. I am the Lac du Flambeau Tribal Community Development Educator for the Lac du Flambeau Tribe via UW-Madison Extension. For those who don't know, some of you are familiar with the county extension offices, but Extension also has about 5 tribal offices also within the state. And I happen to be one of them here in Lac du Flambeau. I'm from Lac du Flambeau. I'm LDF Ojibwa. So this is my home. I work very closely with the Lac du Flambeau Tribal Planning Department and Tribal Administration, and therefore Tribal Council on a lot of different projects and community development initiatives. So with that being said, the reason Brittany invited me today, actually I really don't know why. I know very little, but I will tell you a little bit about the process we used during the last year's prior COVID CARES resources that were available and out from the federal government. And basically what we've done in a collaboration piece with the Tribal Planning Department for a long time now, probably a couple of decades, is do community input processes, open houses, forums, surveys, different ways to get pulse and read of the community and what they think is important and what their vision of the community is or should be. So we kind of keep a running tab on those things, and they could be anywhere from just capacity building things like we need, a better water resource plan, or we need infrastructure, we need a youth center, we need a new school, or whatever the case may be. And we kind of keep tabs on all that information. So with that being said, when COVID CARES resources start coming in, and they came in pretty fast and furious, there were, in that particular case, if anybody was paying attention, a lot of compliance issues with that. You couldn't just do whatever you wanted with those dollars. They had to be tied back very specific to things related to COVID. And there was a time frame of when you could spend by, where you could use those dollars. With that being said, we were able to, even though a lot of people were working from home, able to conduct Zooms, present the information that we had from prior meetings, et cetera, and develop a team and a process to sort of organize and coordinate those resources and try to get sort of sustainable, long-term, meaningful resources out of those dollars. And so what we did is we developed a grant process for programs, tribal programs, and entities that could do certain things. And we just did a blanket invite and say, here's the process, here's an application process, here are the guidelines based on COVID. What can you do within your program or whatever? We even had sort of some local nonprofits ask and put their sort of application in, and what can you do with these dollars related to these activities under COVID? And as that process went on, there was a team developed to sort of review those grants and see how they first of all fit within the compliance aspect of COVID dollars. And then secondly, to look at sort of the community needs and asset assessments that we had to see how that tied into the community needs. And then third thing was to sort of say, what of these scenarios are sustainable or value added, if you will, for the community? In other words, we weren't looking at adding staffing, because these are one-time dollars and you don't want to get into a situation where you have a position or develop a position and now you don't have the resources to continue it. So what can we do internally that sort of has a one-time fixed cost scenario in those? And we went through a very long process. And through that process, we narrowed it down to the top, I would say top, say 10 projects to take to council, our tribal council, and then they then would have the final say in that process to say where things are at. What was nice about it, when we got to council using those criteria, there wasn't much changes to the outcomes on where those dollars are going. And I feel that that team and the community as a whole did a very good job of looking at sort of long-term ramifications of those dollars and not just spend it on whatever. And I'll give you a quick example of that. Our tribal clinic was able to, instead of farming out COVID-related testing, for example, they're able to purchase the equipment they needed to do our own testing here, and tracing, et cetera, and able to develop a process for that. Now we have that equipment, we have that process, those things are in place from a capacity perspective, so we're ready to go if as things unfold and with the numbers kind of creeping back up, there's things that we can do here locally without having to rely on somebody else, as one simple example. So that was the CARES resources a year ago. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit into the ARPA resources. And now Brittany mentioned earlier in the introduction that there's a big difference between CARES dollars and ARPA. ARPA, in our minds and what we've seen so far, and what the leading perspective of it is it's a lot more flexible. The time frame of when you can spend those dollars are longer than 1 year. And I apologize for the ringing. So we have a different perspective on how we're moving this forward. But what we did so far in that process is take some of the same information, specifically in infrastructure development, that has been captured by the community during the last 5-year period, and say to our constituents and community members, here's what we've heard. What are you thinking in regards to what we have going on now? And take that information, and we compiled it to our leadership, to our tribal council, and said, here's some of the top infrastructure ideas and concepts that fit the general compliance issues that we're seeing or hearing about under the ARPA resources. And we want to put this on the table because as these dollars become available, we don't want it to be where we're not considering long-term ramifications on these things again, right? We want to get bang for the buck and look at sustainability and be innovative in what we do with those dollars in a good way for the community. So we were able to provide that information, so at least tribal leadership can kind of look at those things. The next step of that was, okay, these are good ideas, but what are these infrastructure projects going to cost us, and what are some of the general outcomes that you think would occur over this? So we revisited that. We got cost estimates, And we also looked at what some of the long-term outcomes could possibly be if we did certain things. And at this present time, that information has been given to council. Some of it, some of the information was given to community to kind of have a dialogue. And as we speak, tribal council is holding community public hearings of you with tribal membership to kind of visit those things and say what's really important here. What do we want to do as a community? Now, I will say this: I think sometimes that leaders and leadership, sometimes it can be scary to take things like that out to the community and get input, because some leaders or some scenarios are elected officials where they say, well, I was elected to do these things and help make these decisions. But I think it's good to always do a check-in with community and community perspective of what those things could maybe mean and what they could bring to the table for anyone, and specifically in a region like Grow North. So just we're still going through that process. We're not done with it yet. But some of the leading candidate sort of theme areas for us right now are affordable housing, of course, broadband. And I don't think there's anybody that's on here or will be listening to this doesn't agree that we need to do something in regards to broadband. And actually daycare. Daycare is becoming a sort of one of the leading candidates also within the community about improving and expanding daycare possibilities within the community. So I'm not saying that those will be the ones for sure, but it seems like they have a lot of momentum and perspective for the community, positive perspective for the community. Again, no decisions have been made at this time for sure. We're also looking at, because of those scenarios and some of the other infrastructure dollars that may be coming forward soon, how can we get bang for the buck? For example, can we use some of the dollars that are coming in now for certain things that are hard to get resources for? And then the next phase would be, if, for example, in infrastructure, there's very specific things on broadband, then maybe we wait and go after those resources for broadband. And again, kind of spread things out in a way to keep moving this forward as a community. And the way we look at things here is maybe, I won't say unique, but everything is connected. So when we talk about community development and what we're doing long term, you can't separate things. A lot of times we like to categorize things. So here's housing, here's daycare. We look at that housing, affordable housing, daycare intertwined in developing labor force development and workforce development training. All those things are connected together in some capacity to improve our young families and giving them a sense of direction and moving forward in a good way. So I'm kind of doing a lot of talking here, but I guess maybe at this time, I just stop and see if there's anyone that wants to ask questions. And I'd rather have almost a dialogue than to continue to talk.
Thanks, Brian. Anyone have questions?
Can I ask one, Brittany?
Absolutely.
Thank you. And thank you, Brian, for the talk today. One of the things that jumped out to me was when you're talking about the grant process for individuals who are applying for use of funds, and in the experience that you have, what are some other things that the tribal council looked at, and yourself when you were designing the grant process? What were some other things that you looked at including there as criteria beyond just the eligibility requirements of the CARES funds?
We looked at long-term vision for a community. We've been working on these type of community input processes for a long time. And the community, again, sort of looking at things like, we can't just look at what we can do right now, but what are those things that we're looking at that have long-term ramifications for a community, even looking 7 generations out. And then I'll just, the quickest and easiest perspective, and it didn't really work out in the CARES because of the dollars and how, you only had a short window to spend those down. But like in broadband, we all know the situation in northern Wisconsin, and for those of us that are under Frontier, we have Frontier as the only provider in the area, and nobody seems to know exactly what's going to happen with that. We looked at, what is it long term that we need to do so we're in a better situation, so we're not under the thumb of one entity or something that can overnight just disappear on us, and then now what do we do? So that was the other part of that. That was the other criteria. What makes a long-term sustainable sense for the community as a whole? If that helps. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Definitely. Thank you.
In other words, we could have people say, oh, we need this right now. And yeah, right now, maybe there's something that we can do in this area short term. But what does that do for us long term? What does that really do for the community long term? And I'm a grandpa now. A lot of people don't know that know me well, but I'm a grandpa now. So I have I've always had that perspective of looking at generations out, but this put a different spin on it to me. What are we, that legacy of what are we leaving for our grandkids or for our future family members, and what can we do for them long term? It's not about us. Our time is now, but what are we doing, for our loved ones, if you will?
Thank you. I appreciate that. Any other questions? We have a couple other people on the call.
I expect at least one question per person. There's only 3 other people on here, so.
Well, I'll ask a question. Can you give a sneak peek about how you're thinking about the ARPA dollars, perhaps with housing, the strategy around broadband is an excellent item. One of the things that was in the governor's budget that fell out was line extension grants. My personal feeling is that perhaps towns should hold on to that to do line extensions and think about a grant process around that. Can you give a sneak peek about what you may be looking at for ARPA dollars?
Yeah, so under the broadband scenario, we're trying not to use ARPA dollars if we can help it, only because there's other resources out there right now. But the plan B would be, if we did, probably to look at backhaul, bring in another line. Our business development corporation under the tribes umbrella would probably, with help from us, would take the lead on that and implementation. We'd help with the infrastructure development of it, but getting that backhaul, and you know this better than anybody, Brittany, if you can get that and you can start another system within the community, that's bang for the buck. We already have some what we call campus fiber within the tribal facilities in our sort of our urban downtown area, but the community as a whole needs that boost also. But that's what we would probably do under that scenario. As far as housing goes, now that's a whole big dynamic, and looking at different strategies. The couple that come to mind is that we do have a Chippewa Housing Authority that works at low-income families, rentals, if you will. Over the years, that focus has kind of gone around in different directions, to the point that people forget that those low-income rentals aren't like a long-term sort of answer. That is to help people get on their feet, that kind of thing. So what we're looking at, one of the ideas would be to build affordable housing, well built, not necessarily fancy or the Taj Mahal kind of stuff, but that would kind of go into the area that I would say would be home ownership, away from any other entity, any kind of housing authority scenario. That opens up other rentals for people that are looking for a home, and start a process that way. And then we would become the financial entity to make it a simple loan process for those families And then as those dollars come in, we could do some other additional houses. That's one strategy. And there are a few others that I would say they're sort of at the fledgling stage. I'd rather even not even bring them up until we get a better handle as to what those could possibly be. But I always think that would be one of the leading candidates that I just mentioned.
Great, thank you. Other questions?
But going back to the broadband really quickly, we feel, you know, we are really nervous about Frontier. And again, they're the main provider here. And we all know the story behind Frontier and what's going on or not going on. And it scares us to one day they could theoretically just be gone. And then what do you do? So we're diligently trying to work on that broadband and that backhaul and getting something else in here so we can keep things moving. So,
Right.
And that's has ties not only in education and health and wellness, but economic development. So, and that's key to our business park and our workforce development training center.
Absolutely. Heather Baker and Judy, any questions?
I don't think I have any.
Just a quick question to you then, Heather. Does this make sense to your situation about, you know, like in your municipality, thinking through how to do a grant process for some of these programs, or even just look at the projects that are potentially, you know, ARPA dollar related?
I guess we don't even really have anything in mind right now because, you know, $56,000, what do you do with that? You know what I mean?
Yep.
And that's not enough to, like, I don't think start broadband or something or housing, you know, so you want to spend it in the best way possible. Like he was talking for the best of the community, but you know, where do you even start?
Right. And can you remind me what company from what what municipality you're with?
Town of Wolf River.
Okay, so I guess this is where Jake could probably jump in for 2 seconds. When you're looking at such a small pool of dollars, even the projects that are inside your budget that continually get pressed to the side, that is one of the strategies to think about. Brian's point about pricing out what comes to the table is really important, even when you have $50,000 to be looking at. But I think this is where Jake can step in from the Towns Association point of view. And again, caveat is that ARPA, you know, guidance is not finalized, but this is where we can ask questions.
Yeah. One other thing I would just highlight is that, you know, obviously there's different rules and conditions depending on the pot of funds that you're working with. So I think everybody has to take a step back immediately and think that, you know, ARPA is a $1.9 trillion spending bill. The funds that local governments typically interact with are the local fiscal recovery funds, which have different sets of rules than other funds might have. So that's the first thing. In regards to the broadband piece, you know, in my experience here, the towns have seen some success in using their ARPA dollars to put towards matching funds when participating in some of the state broadband monies that have been made available. This is really the most activity that we've seen with towns immediately using their ARPA dollars. I do want to highlight that there will be another round of funding available. I think it's 125 million that will be released at some point in the near future. I don't know what the rules and requirements of that, you know, like I said, there's different funds of money and everything. I don't know what the rules for that fund of money will be, but you know, that's something that towns could keep in mind. Now, when you partner regionally, that's where you start to see really big impacts. Like, for example, I was up in a county a couple weeks ago doing some ARPA programming. And at that meeting, the county was there with a provider that was looking to do projects within that county. And they were looking for partnerships among the towns to go in with the county and that provider when they were seeking out, I think they were seeking out state funding and federal funding. So that's, I think there are opportunities there. And I totally understand where you're coming from, Heather, that, yeah, for $56,000, that's not enough money to put in fiber in every single mile of road within your community. It's just, it's not possible.
Yeah.
So I think that that's somewhere that towns could look to, at least at first. Now, the reason why I think it's so valuable to have Brian here with us today is with the grant process, because there are some opportunities with the fiscal recovery funds to establish grant programs, providing assistance to households and also nonprofits and businesses. So in that case, some of the restrictions on the fiscal recovery funds are that you have to use the funds to address a negative economic impact by the household or business. And you have to prove that, that obviously that there was this negative economic impact, but also how you providing this aid as a government addresses the negative economic impact. And it also has to be proportional to the negative economic impact. So like, for example, providing a grossly large amount of funds to a particular business when they only experienced a small negative economic impact due to COVID-19 would not be allowable under ARPA. So when we talk about grant processes, looking for certain items, that's what I think is important. And I really like how Brian framed it, which is if you're going to provide grants to maybe not necessarily in the sphere of addressing negative economic impacts, but maybe in the sense of spurring the recovery of, like, for example, tourism, travel, and hospitality. When you're providing grants out there for relief to businesses, that's somewhere where you're looking at what's going to be the biggest bang for the buck for the long run. So those are just some general thoughts I had.
Yeah.
Brian, go ahead.
And Jake, just to add to that a little bit. So what we kind of did, and it might sound weird, we kind of looked at that long-term thing first, and then we went back and looked at the COVID and the compliance and say, okay, does this connect back? Can we connect it back? And somebody might say that's backwards thinking, but if you're looking just specifically and only at the compliance, you'll never get to that long-term thinking. So that's how we did it. And there were some cases where we said we can't do it just because it doesn't fit the requirements. In other cases it did. But Heather, just to kind of add to that, and I don't know if you can do it with these resources or not, but I would think, and I'll just use the broadband as an example. If you were to sort of write the caveat that, because during COVID, we realized that our broadband scenarios in our area were terrible. And we had kids that were trying to go to school from home, and we had businesses hurting and they didn't have broadband access. And we had people trying to telecommute and they just were having a heck of a time. Those kind of things. Based on that, I would think there might be a way to take that money, $54,000, and say, we need to have a plan to deal with our broadband capabilities here. And because we always teach, I do a grant workshop training about what a grant really is and what you need to do. And one of the things I always say, the first thing is a grant is a plan. You're selling a plan of improvement in some area to a funding source. So if you have a plan first, then the grant comes second. So if you have the plan, then that plan is basically laid out in a grant process. So if there's a way to use that money, and Jake was kind of alluding to it, working with other entities to say, let's get an engineering firm in here and talk about what we could do, and look at middle mile or end mile, or whatever it is that we need to do, and what we could possibly do, and put it in a plan, and we have cost estimates and everything in there. Now we have an opportunity to go after additional resources through ARPA when those other funds that Jake's referring to come out.
Makes sense.
And I would also add the note, if you are a town and you're really contemplating using broadband dollars, check with your county level administrators, all of the members, but also with the Economic Development Corporation, and ask if they're actively pursuing broadband initiatives. Many of the counties have working committees, and that's the area that I think is the greatest connector for our rural communities right now, to have that type of strategic work, right? So if a county has a broadband strategic plan for the whole entire county, just think about, the size of your town and the unincorporated area between the towns. Brian's talking about this thing called middle mile. Well, that middle mile has to connect those towns. And it's really going to be the county, and again, thinking bang for buck, doing that engineering plan. I'll use the 2 examples. Marathon County, I think in 2020 it was published, did a county level broadband strategic plan. And from that, they've been able to really work on identifying areas of need and attracting providers to those conversations very strategically, because they know the need. Oneida County is now approved to have that done. Lac du Flambeau sits inside of a couple of different counties, but Vilas County is also really working on their broadband plan. Forest County has a broadband committee from their economic development side. So if you don't know the answer, just reach out to me, because I have pretty good understanding of what's happening in the Grow North region. And then what we're trying to do is make sure that everyone has the right information to make good decisions. And so let's talk about those broadband grants for a second. Even at the state level, we're like comfortably watching people apply for $1 million+ grant projects in the area, but they need a match. And so when a county is going in for a multi-million-dollar grant, those ARPA dollars from the towns can be the match inside of it. So that will really help that strategic thinking for the community. There's another layer above that, which is regional. And I have conversations with all of these different counties about this, but there is Forest County's current application in for the PSC grant that just closed is up to $7 million, and it crosses into Vilas and Oneida counties, and they're getting match from at least Oneida County. And that's what we're hoping to see in the future. So when we're starting to pool those dollars together, we get to what Brian was talking about, that backhaul middle mile. That's where we're going to start seeing prices go down inside of the area, because we're paying a high cost because we don't have middle mile in the area. I have a little bit of information on that. It's a very deep topic, but we're here to help you address these issues and ask questions, and perhaps talk to your members so that they at least have the feeling that they can be talking about the potential projects. This is the time to talk about the projects. And Brian's right. When you put in a grant, the grants that really pass muster really show the thinking that's behind the application. And that's what we want to help you understand and have happen. So other questions?
Great information, Brittany. Thanks.
Could I add one more point to that, Brittany, please? And I don't mean to add too much here, but one thing that I think it's really important for towns to do right now, and one thing that I think is extremely consistent with Brian had mentioned earlier, is that having a community discussion to identify what the priorities of your community are is really important right now. Taking the time to talk amongst your governing body, or taking the time to engage in with the public, whether that be public forums, public comment at your town board meetings, or any sort of governing body meetings. I think that's so important because it makes the process easier in the sense that you can take that feedback that you get from the public and you can look at the requirements of ARPA and you can start to boil things down. What are the things that are just completely beyond our grasp with ARPA funds? There are going to be a few of those, and you'll just have to put them outside and not think about them. Don't completely get rid of them, because maybe as time goes on, ARPA's rules and regulations start to become more broad, but we don't know that yet. So they're off the table for right now. There are some that are going to be likely allowable, and that's where you have to talk about the community priorities and the information that you get back from the public and how that connects together in this grand strategy for your community to use these ARPA funds. So that's what we've been really recommending right now, is that we understand that for towns, cities, villages, tribal governments, the state even, that right now in the process that it's very early yet. You've got until December 31st, 2024 to commit these funds. So taking the time to have these discussions is really going to set you off on the right foot.
Mm-hmm. And just to add to that, I 100% agree with that. And this is our experience over the years, is the more community input we have and there's a little more consensus buy into something, it is a lot easier to sell as you're moving it forward within the community. If it's just a one-person show or a couple of people thinking I know best, that gets you in trouble. I've seen it more than once. I've been doing this for longer than I want to say. So yeah, I agree with the community input, and it's kind of scary sometimes because you do get some, how can I say this? You do get some interesting ideas and you say, oh, okay. But you also get a lot of common threads from people about their perceptions and perspectives of things. And, there's common ground there that you can work with.
Great. And so thank you everyone for being here. Any last comments, Brian? Because I know that you have to run in a little bit.
Not really. I seem like I felt like I did a lot of talking, so I really don't have any other thing to say. I'll probably think of something after we're done, but right now, no. Well,
great. So I think you talking teaches us a lot. So that's why I wanted you to talk. So we'll put this up on YouTube. If you have elected officials who want to watch this, go ahead and send them over that direction. I'll make sure to email everyone, all three of the links on YouTube. Huge caveats, just as Jake said, this is early days, the guidance is not finalized, but we want to support you all in having rich discussions with your community members so that we can figure out how to work in the way that Brian said, let's think about the long-term strategy and how to connect that the need in with those, unprecedented dollars. It feels like a little bit of a blip, but we can do a lot with those funds because we haven't had them before. And yeah, so we're going to take a break with this series until the guidance does get finalized. And then we'll probably ask questions of you all and then bring this back for some more learning. You will see from Grow North that we're working really diligently on the housing issue. We have a very active group working on that. Broadband is within our purview, so we're going to be really hitting that hard starting at the end of this month. And we're also working on workforce issues, including childcare coming up. So Brian, I have a question to you about who's the right person to bring into a conversation about childcare. There are many pockets of funding that are flowing around right now, and we're figuring out how Grow North works, the state dollars that are open now with workforce development dollars.
Yeah.
And so how can we play a supportive role in the region working on that? So, if you hear one of those 3 areas that's really kind of bubbling up.
Yeah, I think we also need to have a conversation about those state dollars in regards to workforce development training.
Yeah.
We have that facility going up, but we got to make sure that we're in a situation that we're actually doing the capacity building out of that building.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and maybe Brian, that's I'm supposed to talk to Dean sometime this, I think, in a couple weeks. So maybe we can grab you and talk about what we're doing on our side, because we're thinking about the area and upskilling too. So that's really very important.
Yeah. Let me know, because I don't know how long, I don't want to steal the center, but I don't know how much longer he's going to actually be here.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Sounds good. Well, great. Well, thank you, everyone. Again, if there's any questions, please send them my way. We'll put this on YouTube. We'll make sure to email this out. And again, we'll be revisiting ARPA probably in the fall. Do your communication with your communities. If you need support from Grow North, just reach out. Jake is from the Towns Association, but he also holds an elected official position. So he's got that dual perspective. And we'll all certainly be in touch. Thank you for taking a little bit of your lunchtime.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.